Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show is brought to you by DKI Canada. Across the street, across the country. He is one of Canada's leading historians on the sweet science. Boxing historian Lou Eisen in the house to talk about his brand new book, Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show. Coming up! Today's guest hails from Toronto. He is a boxing historian who has written for Ring Magazine, Boxing Monthly, The Fight Network, Ringside Report, KO Digest, Beatboxers.com, The Toronto Star. He's been on CBC, ESPN, TSN. He's on the selection committee for the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He was a good friend of Ali's longtime trainer, Angelo Dundee. He played trainer Ray Arcel in Cinderella Man. His latest book is Boxing's Greatest Controversies, Blunders, Blood Feuds and Mob Corruption. Please welcome to the program, Lou Eisen. Lou, good to have you here again, my friend.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure. I'm just going to hold my book up there for a sec. And
yes, of course. There's a closer look, all right?
And that's oh, thank you. And that's Tommy Burns on the left, as you would know, and Jack Johnson. Yeah. It's great to be here on the top sports podcast in sports. Because
thank you, my friend.
Well, it's well deserved, and I'm not the only one who says that, because all the other ones are just these guys coming from other professions and don't really know boxing, but you know boxing and you know sports, all sports, better than anyone, because this has been your job for a long time. It's your business to know more than other people, and you do it great.
Yes. Some 40 years or something. That's a pretty good run. Okay, so let's talk about you, Lou. First of all, how did your love for boxing come about?
Well, that's a good question. When I was very, very young, I was watching boxing with my father. As I got older, I didn't really get along with my father, but we would watch boxing together. And probably the first fight I saw, which I have in my book, I was only 2. Was Emil Griffith and Benny Kid Pratt in the fight where Pratt died. And, you know, as Pratt's getting pounded in the last round, 13th round, my mother turned the TV off, and my father I was watching that. But she said, I'm not going to have my son watch this violent spectacle. But I kept watching it. And around my mother passed away in 1966, but around that time, I was flipping channels, and who did I see? Muhammad Ali. And I loved Muhammad. I just fell in love with him. I was 6 years old. This guy was funny. He was cool. He was tough. And as I got older, I became more enamored of him and started to watch fighting. So like anything, you know, if you're a music fan and Bob Dylan says, I really like Woody Guthrie, then you listen to Woody Guthrie. And
right.
Woody Guthrie says, I like this guy. So, you know, Muhammad talked about Jack Johnson. So I watched and read about Jack Johnson. And then he mentioned Jack Dempsey. So I learned about Dempsey and other people. I fell in love with it because to me, it's the bastion of honesty. There's not, you can't, it isn't like wrestling where you can bring a foreign object. It's not like hockey where you can go on the bench and take a break. And you know, from being, you know, a championship boxer yourself, it's just you. If you're tired, you're tired. There's no, you know, timeout. I need a break. It's you.
Or tagging somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You can't tag out and have someone else fill in. You, whether you're tired or not tired, and whether you want to or not want to, you're in there, and it's your life on the line at that moment, and you have to produce.
So we saw a couple of brief photos of Ali and Perret and Griffith, but I want to talk about Ali a little bit and his trainer, Angelo Dundee, who became a good friend of yours. How did you befriend Angelo, and tell us about that relationship?
Well, I'm very glad you asked. Thank you. When I was young, when I was 13, 14, I guess, or 12 or 13, Clyde Gray, whom you've known well for years, mm-hmm. you know, was the Canadian and British Commonwealth welterweight champion. And he was rated always in the top 2 or 3 in the world. So they thought, we'll bring Jose Napoli's. They brought him in and said, we'll bring him into Toronto because Napoli's was older. And Angelo trained Napoli's. And they brought him to Toronto. And I went to see the fight with my father. And I waited after because I watched Angelo Dundee. My father said, that's the greatest trainer that ever lived. That's the guy he trained Ali and he's trained everyone. So he's the best of all time. And I watched him and I waited after the fight and he came out and I spoke to him and I couldn't believe I was speaking to him. And he said, do you box? And I said, yes. And are you good? And I said, well, I'm pretty good. He said, then you should quit. And I was crestfallen. Why? Because you have to be special. If you're not special, you'll get hurt. He said, what are your best subjects in school? And I said, English and history. And he said, perfect. Then you can write about the history of boxing. And I said, okay. Wow. But I never really took it to heart at that moment, but he was right. And then he said the special words I'll never forget, do you want to meet the big guy? And, that was what he called Muhammad, the big guy. And Muhammad came out and I looked up at him because, from meeting Muhammad, he was a giant. And I just started to cry. I could feel these tears. And Muhammad knew what he meant to people. So he put his hand on my face and he said, nice to meet you. How you doing in school? And I said, I'm doing all right in school. Well, all right's not good enough. You better do better in school. I want to see that. And I just listened to him talk. I couldn't believe it. Like, you don't get to meet your heroes. That's not supposed to happen, especially the person who's the famous man on earth. And I went, wow. And I just said, wow. I love you, Muhammad. And he said, I know. And that about a year later, when he fought George Foreman, and I was going to junior high school, everyone made fun of me because they said, Ali's going to knock him out in 8 rounds. He said so. And then go, crazy, Louis. You're an idiot. You don't know anything. And I thought, but that can't be true ever. I'm 14. I've read hundreds of books already on boxing. Ali's not going to lie. And Ali said, you can't punch straight. You can't punch around and stand in front of me and hope to win. That's just not going to happen. And George Foreman has never been the distance. He gets guys in 2 or 3 rounds. If I can stretch the fight out, his parachute won't open. That's exactly what it said. And he was right. And when he did it, I was standing in Maple Leaf Gardens with my father watching on closed circuit. I was going, he did it. He did it. He promised he did it. And he did it. And everyone, it was bedlam. People were crying. They were screaming. No one gave him a chance. And George Foreman told me years later that his main fear was people said, don't kill Ali. You can beat him, but don't kill him. And I kept in contact with Angelo after I met him. He said, don't be a stranger. So I would send him my grades and stuff like that. And he's just a wonderful person. And then when he would come to Toronto occasionally, I'd meet him for dinner or lunch. And then we did Cinderella Man together. And that was wonderful. So, I love spending time with him on set. And after we'd watch fights and we had a great time because this would be heaven for any fight fan or writer. Before the movie was filmed, I sat with Angelo at Toronto Film Studios and we watched old black and white fight films. A lot of them were hard to get for like 6 months before the movie started filming. And these were by a company that no longer exists, Circle Films. So, Joe, they had a mic in the ring so you could hear, Max Barrett saying to Tony Glenn, oh, come on, you fat tub of crap. Show me what you can do. And it was hysterical. But it was wonderful watching all these great old fighters. And Angelo knew them all. And that was incredible. And it blew my mind when I met his brother, Chris. Chris had met John L. Sullivan. Chris knew Sam Langford. Wow. Friend. So he had spoken to these people.
That's the stories must be like endless with those guys. But I want to get back into the book here because it was great. Just finished reading it not very long ago. And it's boxing's greatest controversies, blunders, blood feuds, and mob corruption. What made you feel that was important to write this book? What was your impetus here?
Well, I wanted to show the real stories behind some of these fights. And some of the stories that have come through the ages simply aren't true. But they they've been portrayed as true and were set in stone. So people have thought that, for instance, when Ernie Schaff died after fighting Primo Carnera, that they still write today, well, Max Baer killed him. And when I looked it up, he fought Baer twice. He beat him the first time. Second time, he got knocked out the first time, but it was with 3 seconds to go in the fight. He was ahead, so he won. Second time, he took a bad beating from Baer. And everyone wrote that that's why he died, and Carnera finished the job. But when I looked at his record, Joe, he fought 4 more times. So I took his autopsy to my neurologist, and my neurologist looked at it, and he said, I can't give you a medical opinion on someone I haven't seen. That's unethical. But I can say this. It's highly unlikely that a man will receive catastrophic brain injury and then fight 4 more times. It just isn't. It's just not possible. Right. And he said, from what this autopsy, although it's written in older language, says, is that Schaff died from spinal meningitis. And more importantly, he would have died had he not fought that night. And instead of going to a hospital, he went to a religious retreat. And he went into the fight with a high temperature. And back then, the referees, doctors couldn't have ascertained that. You could only find it out after you do an autopsy if someone had spinal meningitis. And Schaff, the examination, they gave him a thorough examination. The only thing they didn't do was take his temperature. And back then, it was the Great Depression. Schaff was a fighter. He had to fight. Everyone was broke. No one was working in his family. He needed the money. And I think, it's Chris Dundee told me, if Schaff had been healthy, the mob wouldn't have allowed the fight to go ahead, because Carnera was a mob fighter. He would have beaten Carnera. Carnera, as Humphrey Bogart said in the great, I can't remember, and it's my favorite boxing movie, The Harder They Fall. He said, he couldn't hit hard enough to bust an egg, and that's true. But Carnera suffered all this, and so did Max Baer. Suffered all this grief from the press for years for something that neither of them were responsible for. So what happens is, just as a sidebar, Baer fought a guy named Frankie Campbell. It's a great new book out on him. And Baer killed him in the ring. And forever after, they said, Baer said, I supported his family. I did this, I did that. That was deliberate. Baer was guilty of that. This was a guy he hit, and the guy fell against the ropes, and he was out. And Baer put his hand on his neck and kept hitting him over and over. And a bunch of people entered the ring to tackle Baer. Baer was guilty of it, but Baer was a mob fighter, so nothing happened.
Well, just an interesting sidebar of Max Baer. His son was Buddy Baer, as we knew it as Jethro Bodine in the Beverly Hillbillies.
Right.
So you in the book, you've got fights that date as far back as 1772. You went on, one of your chapters was on Joe Gans, an incredibly talented fighter. Why were his accomplishments so remarkable?
Gans was probably 30 to 40 years ahead of his time when you look at skill and ability. Gans didn't get hit in a fight unless he allowed it. And he had to allow it because he was a black fighter. So back then, the only way he would guarantee any white fighters, good fighters, getting in the ring with him would be if he promised not to go out after them immediately. If he promised to let the fight go 8 to 10 rounds and let them hit him and bloody his nose. And his skill level was off the charts. He was very quick. He was always in shape. He had one of the best jabs ever. He was the best ever in the history of the sport at setting a man up to knock him out. The problem with Gans was not with him. It was with his white manager, Al Herford, who was a criminal, like most managers back then, and our crook, I should say, would be more apropos. He stole a lot of Gans' money. And mind you, people don't like to hear this, but Gans also, because of the racism of the time, spent a lot of money gambling and drinking, to make himself feel better. So he was fighting for the world lightweight title against Frank Ern. And Ern caught him with a headbutt, accidental, but it opened a huge cut over Gans' eye. And the blood, they couldn't close it. And he couldn't open his eye. The blood was getting in it. So they stopped the fight in the 13th round, and Gans, was upset with that. And Aaron said, well, I beat you. You quit. Not me. You quit. And everyone knew Gans was the best lightweight in the world. So his manager, Al Herford, said, you know what we'll do? We'll get you another shot at him. But what we'll do is we'll get a fight against someone who's really good, and you'll lose on purpose. And then he'll think you're not good anymore, and he won't take a chance. So Gans fought 22 more times and beat everyone, most of them by knockout. Then he fights terrible Terry McGovern, who it's almost criminal that people don't know who he is today. He was like Mike Tyson. He was a force of nature. And the minute that bell started, he just came out and with both hands just shellacked everyone. He was only 5'3", 5'4", but he could fight. He was fighting to feed his extended family. And so, but McGovern is interesting. Him and Stanley Ketchel and the whole history of boxing are interesting from that time period because they weren't infected with the virus of racism. McGovern liked everyone. His trainer was Jewish, Charlie Goldman, who went on to train Rocky Marciano. So he was good friends of Gans, and his manager, the Broadway impresario Sam Harris, they got together with Al Herford and Joe Gans, and they said, sure, we'll do that with you to help you out. I'd love to help you out. And the thing is, Gans was 5'8", and in his prime, 135 pounds or more. McGovern was 5'3" and 125 pounds soaking wet. There's no way McGovern could have stood up to Gans if the fight had been on the level. But they fought at Tattersall's in Chicago, which was owned by Lou Eisen. And one way they knew that the fight was fixed was large majority of the crowd were African Americans. But just before the fight, they put all their money on McGovern. And so there's a film of the fight, and Gans didn't throw a single punch. He went down 7 times in 2 rounds, and the fight was over. And the minute the fight was over, he got up and he shook McGovern's hand. They hugged, they laughed. The whole thing was a setup, and Gans admitted it later. And he was the one that suffered all the criticism, and it hurt his career. He still had to wait another 2-3 years to get Frank Kern back in the ring. But when he did at Fort Erie, Ontario, he said, yes, I'll let it go 10 rounds before we start fighting. And he went out and he knocked him out in 1 minute. He said, I'm not taking
the first round.
Yeah, the first round. He just went out. I'm not going to let you headbutt me or thumb me or kick me. He just went out and hit him a left to the liver, right to the head, and that was over. And Aaron was legitimately unconscious. He said, I couldn't take a chance again of getting headbutted. But he still suffered.
Right.
Because of what he did. And he did do it, but it shouldn't take away. He had no choice. That's what someone asked me. What if he said no? And he did that before to Al Herford, and he was blacklisted from boxing. So there's nothing he could do. And I have a picture of taken in the early 1900s, and that's 3 guys sitting in a row. It's Canada's George Dixon, Barbados' Joe Walcott, and Joe Gans. And none of them are smiling. Because in the back, their manager is smiling, and he's the one that took all their money. Mind you, Dixon was managed by Tom O'Rourke, but still, all of them ended up broke, unfortunately.
Right. Sam Dixon, a Canadian. Another Canadian you talk about in the book, Tommy Burns, of course, the Canadian heavyweight champion who broke the color barrier, many, many years ago by agreeing to step into the ring and defend his title against Jack Johnson. Now, for a guy who was 5'7", 160 pounds, Burns had a pretty amazing career in that heavyweight division. Fought some great fighters, and this is a great Canadian fighter.
He not only fought them, but decimated them. Burns was a really smart guy. No one gave him credit for being smart in the ring. And when he learned boxing. He didn't go out drinking. He didn't go out gambling or palling out with his friends. He got up at 5:30 in the morning, did his road work, and spent the rest of the day till like 5 or 6 boxing 7 days a week. He knew what he was doing. And so he learned from a guy named Sam Biddle in Detroit that if that size is not an impediment, because you're 5'7", crouch, make yourself less of a target. And this was always Charlie Goldman, the great trainer. This was always his motto, that turn your weaknesses into strength. So he had tree trunk arms, thick legs, and he could really, really bang, and he could hurt people. Now, his wife was the sister of one of his sparring partners, Harry Peppers, and his wife, Irene, was black. And so he had no problem facing Johnson. Didn't want to, and he avoided him for a while, but it wasn't a color thing. He avoided him because he wanted the right amount of money. He said, listen, he's the best out. He's the best out there. He's my toughest test. Therefore, I should get paid the most. And he wanted 30 grand. And 30 grand then would be like a fighter saying, I'll fight him again, but I want 700 million or 800 million. And they laughed. No one's going to pay that. But Hugh McIntosh in Australia said, yeah, I'll pay it. And the fight almost apparently didn't come off because Jack Johnson got only 5 grand. And he said, I'm not going into the ring, which he did often, unless you give me more money. And apparently McIntosh, I've never verified this, but the rumor is he put a loaded gun to Johnson's head and then got him into the ring. So he was in shape for the fight against Jack Johnson, and he was ready. But the problem was the skill level of Johnson was so far superior. And at that time, Johnson, I think, was, in size. Johnson was 6'2", 6'1", 6'2", 215, 220. And he was, and he just wasn't big enough. And Johnson drops him, as you'll see here, in the first 10, 15 seconds of the fight. And Johnson was so good and so quick. No one had seen a defensive fighter like that. A guy who just, who you couldn't hit and had a tremendous jab, knew how to line you up for punches. And he was the best heavyweight in the world. Ironically, at this point in time, he's probably a little past his prime, but he wasn't going to give up on his dream. And all the other white heavyweight champions before Burns badmouthed him. And he said, tell me, how many of you would turn down the money? And no one responded. He said, I guess your racism doesn't matter when you get a lot of money. I guess you can throw that out the window. None of you would have done anything different. And indeed, Jeffries fought Johnson after and got destroyed. And during the fight, Burns, out of character, would call him all these terrible racial epithets. And years later, he apologized to him, and Johnson accepted it, which shows you the kind of man he was.
Right.
Excuse me. He wrote him a letter, and then he met him. And he said, I was wrong in what I said to you, Jack, and I feel bad about it. And he'd become a minister by this time, and Johnson just hugged him. And only stories like that happen in boxing. And you have to remember, Burns beat Marvin Hart.
Marvin Hart for the title, yeah.
Yeah, for a Klansman. And Hart, who was a Klansman, and Hart was a much bigger man, but Burns went over and Hart was just nuts. And he said, are you going to illegally wrap your hands and put something in your gloves like you always do? Well, he never did that. But right. He got so angry, he was just yelling at him during the fight. And every time he yelled at him, Burns would smack him in the face. And he gave his title away because Burns psyched him out. Burns
oh, yeah, he did. There's a good book, it's a great book, actually. I can't remember. It's called Canada's Unknown Heavyweight Champion.
Yeah, I have that.
It's a good book, and it tells you there's a lot of amazing stories. It tells you he traveled around the North America and then into Europe looking for guys to fight and fighting anybody who would challenge him, basically.
Well,
he'd fight anybody.
That's right. And you see those clips of fighting all those British fighters who are supposedly great, and Burns pole axes them with a right hand. And these guys are out before they hit the canvas. And all the newspaper reports, Burns won't go 2 rounds with this guy. He won't go a round with Bombardier Billy Wells or Gunnar Moyer. And once he hits them, bang, they're gone.
Yeah, he won't go around with them because he'll knock them out before the round is over. That's what happened.
That's right.
So getting back to Johnson, had a great title reign, knocked out a lot of guys, as you mentioned. But he eventually ran into Jess Willard. How was Willard able to beat a guy like Johnson, who was, so incredibly Good. And this you
talent.
talk about this fight in the book.
Right. And this is something that people have a hard time dealing with. How could Johnson, one of the all-time greats who had more skill than anyone, be defeated basically by a Luddite, by a guy like Jess Willard, who practically had no skill? And in fact, when Willard started in boxing just by accident, in his first 3 or 4 fights, somebody yelled, "Hey, Willard!" And he turned to look, and then he get punched because he didn't know that you're not supposed to do that.
Not a good idea.
And his trainer, Walter Moynihan, said, when the guy gets him close, clinch him. And he said, okay. And after the round, he said, what's a clinch? He didn't know anything. And he killed a guy in the ring before, John Bull Young, but the guy he killed had been knocked out 4 times in a row within a span of 2 months. So it would be hard to blame Willard for that. And he didn't have much skill, but he was only trained to do one thing, beat Jack Johnson. And that's all he ever did. He didn't do anything before it, and he didn't accomplish anything after. And the way he beat Jack Johnson was the fact that he was 6'7", 260. Johnson was 6'1", 6'2". But Johnson was 37 years old, and people say, well, he wasn't allowed to train. That's not true. He was allowed to train. He was in Mexico training for the fight, and then he went to Cuba to train for the fight, where the fight was. And Johnson was training, but in training camp, his shots didn't have the same force as always, and he didn't have as much stamina as he had before. And which is telling because the fight went 26 rounds, and it was like 105 degrees there in Cuba. But Johnson, the main reason Willard beat him was he fought him at the right time. Johnson was a counterpuncher, pure and simple, and he was not comfortable leading, except, Willard's wingspan, when he put his arms out, was over 7 feet. So Johnson couldn't stand back. For the first time one of the first times in his career, he was not the bigger guy. And so he knew he had to get inside. And the referee said after the first 20 rounds, he said Johnson had won every round. He was pounding Willard's body and his head. And the one thing Willard could do better than any other white fighter then was take a beating. And he kept taking it and taking it and taking it. And Johnson kept getting more tired and more dehydrated. And finally, before the 25th round, his trainer said, get rid of him now. And he backed him into a corner and he poleaxed him just killed him with that huge overhand right. And it was a legitimate knockout. Willard or Johnson later said right after the fight, it was a legitimate knockout. But Johnson was a rogue. And because he was a rogue, he didn't have many friends in boxing. And so he didn't get paid for the fight. He would do theater tours and get the money up front and then do one show and leave for a month tour. He just would take off, not do it. He would check into hotel rooms for a couple of weeks, leave without paying the bill. So he had no friends at that point. And he needed money, and he sold the story to Nat Fleischer that he'd taken a dive. And he said, I took a dive, and it was worked out with the government. But the government didn't like him because they convicted him incorrectly, mind you, but they convicted him on the Mann Act for transporting a woman across the White Slave Act, a white woman across state lines for the purposes of prostitution. Now, that woman was a prostitute, but she was also his wife. So it didn't apply to him. And a lot of other white people did that, especially politicians, but they never got charged. And so, as everyone knows, he skipped after he was convicted. He went to Europe, came back, and he wanted to see his mother before she died. He didn't make it, and he was heartbroken. And his Sam Fitzpatrick, one of his erstwhile managers, said had sent feelers out to the American government. So they spoke to low-level clerks of the Justice Department, the kind of people you meet when you walk into a post office. Can I help you today? And it wouldn't go higher than that. The government said, we're not going to give you anything in writing. We're not going to agree to let him go. He was convicted. He's got to serve his time in jail. We will allow him back into the United States. That is it. But after that, no, he goes to jail. We don't have to make a deal with him. And he loses the fight. He stays in Cuba for a long time. Then he has to leave Cuba, and then he goes to Mexico. And then Pancho Villa arises in Mexico, so he's got to leave there. And finally, in the early 20s, he comes back, and he has to go to Leavenworth, and he has to pay his fine. And people owe him money. He hasn't been paid for the Willie fight or a lot of other fights, but he ripped all these people off, and he had a line of creditors a mile long. And, when he went to Europe to show films of the fight, Sam Fitzpatrick sent him films, but they were just of slapstick comedies. He said, why would I send you the film? You still owe me 80 grand that you ripped me off for. Why would I help you? And there's a thing been going around on the internet for a while now where it's a picture of Joe Louis saying, I love Jack Johnson. He was nice to me, and he told me this, this, and that. And it's completely untrue because his trainer, Jack Blackburn, hated Johnson. And when Johnson tried to approach Lewis to become his trainer, behind him, Blackburn walked up and put a loaded gun behind his head and cocked the trigger. And he wasn't kidding. Blackburn had killed a person before. And it just wasn't his first time with a gun. And he hated Jack Johnson, who'd screwed him over for a lot of money. And so Johnson Blackburn said, don't even turn your head around. Just keep walking. Because he knew Blackburn wasn't kidding.
Wow, intriguing, crazy stories, eh? Like, the business has been, had some corrupt moments throughout history, and you outlined a lot of them. So along comes Willard. He beats Johnson, and you talked about the circumstances around that fight, and then Jack Dempsey knocks Willard out, and Dempsey was 6 inches shorter. Willard is a huge guy. Look at the difference here. Oh yeah, it's like a lightweight fighting a middleweight or whatever. Absolutely. And it's like, yeah. So, but then then the color barrier comes in again after Dempsey takes the title. Why did he decide to re-implement the color?
Well, it wasn't him. It was Doc Kearns, the manager. One of his sparring partners was a person that you know of really well. We discussed him before, the great Larry Gaines, the African-Canadian fighter who had to go to Europe, to London to be big. And he beat Dempsey up in sparring. He was a bigger man than Dempsey. And Kearns had said to Gaines, if you were American, or if you were white, you'd be world champion. And he was supposed to fight Harry Wills. And Wills was 6'4", 220. And Kearns said no. But they signed a contract. They said they would. And then they reneged on it. Now, I personally think Dempsey would have destroyed Wills because Dempsey feasted on taller guys like Fred Fulton, who was 6'7", and Carl Morris, and he also feasted on Willard. Tall guys were tailor-made for Dempsey, and this was the tail end of Wills' career, but they said no, and Dempsey apologized to him, but it didn't help Wills. So the color line was instituted, reinstituted. It came back. And there were good black fighters. It was past the time of Jack Johnson and Sam Langford and Joe Jeanette, but there were still other good fighters like Larry Gaines, who deserved a legitimate shot at the world title, but he never got it. And that's been one of boxing's problems, that racism was there for a long, long time. People think, well, it was racist in 1800s, 1900s. It was racist from the beginning in this late 16, early 1700s. Black fighters had a tough time. Always.
The long count. People still talk about the long count today, 100 years later. Why was it such a big deal? And what do you think happens if everything's done on the up and up?
If everything's done on the up and up, Dempsey regains the title. I have no doubt about that. Dempsey hadn't fought for 3 years. Neither had Willard when he beat him. So he fought Gene Tunney, and Tunney had followed him his whole career. He'd fought on his undercards. And Tunney was only a handful of, you can help me with this, 5 boxers in the whole history of the sport, going back over 300 years, who could fight effectively backing up. Sugar Ray Robinson could do it. Muhammad Ali could do it. Larry Holmes. It's very difficult to fight effectively backing up. But he could do it, Tunney. So could Jack Johnson. And Dempsey was not in great shape. He hadn't fought in 3 years. He wasn't in good shape. So first fight, he wins a wide unanimous decision, Tunney. And then they have the rematch. Before the rematch, he's got to fight. Dempsey fights Jack Sharkey. And Jack Sharkey, Dempsey was not deliberate, but he was a dirty fighter. So he would headbutt you, he'd hit you low, and he hit Sharkey low probably a dozen times. And Sharkey, unbelievably, at one point said, just a sec, and turned to the ref and said, "This guy's hitting me low." And then Dempsey hit him for the left hook and knocked him out. And Dempsey said later, "What was I supposed to do? Wait for an engraved invitation to punch him? You protect yourself at all times." The referee didn't call time. The referee didn't say stop. He said, "Keep fighting." And so he gets to fight Tunney. And before the Tunney fight, which was held in Chicago, Al Capone comes to Dempsey and he says, "I can fix it with the referee and the judges that you win." And Dempsey said, "That's fine. Thank you, but no thank you. I'd rather win on the up and up." Doesn't mean Capone listened to him. He didn't. And on the other hand, Tunney was in a cash bind. He needed money for a training camp. So he went to Chicago mobster Max Boo Boo Hoff, great nickname, who worked for Maxie Gordon, who had worked with Lansky, Meyer Lansky, and Lucky Luciano.
Right.
They led him $200,000, $250,000 for his training camp back then. And, to take that kind of money or any money from a mobster, it's just not healthy. And they'll never let you pay it back. I paid you that back in the interest. Well, there's still more. And so they have the fight, and the referee, the original referee, Capone said, "I've got the referee." And then they replaced the referee. Boo Boo Hoff has his own referee put in. And that referee, I think it was Davey Miller, I'm not sure, that referee was the one who I think screwed up the fight. But the question arose, how did Boo Boo Hoff overrule Chicago, which was the most powerful mob family on the planet? And he went to Oni Madden, who controlled boxing. And Madden was smart enough to share his earnings from boxing with all 5 New York families in Chicago. And they went to Capone and they said, "We want to replace the referee and we'll give you $250,000 to do it." And he said, "Sure." He didn't listen to Dempsey. And so the mistake, it was Dave Barry who ended up refereeing it. And the mistake he made was, according to the rules, Dempsey dropped Tunney in the 7th round. Up to that point, Tunney had won the first 6 rounds by a wide margin. And Tunney had flipped the game plan. When the bell came, he didn't run. He attacked Dempsey every round. And he had him hurt and crushed and ready to go several times. So in the 7th round, in his corner, Jimmy DeForest, the trainer for Dempsey, said, "What you have to do is you got to fake one way and punch with the other hand." So he dropped to his left and then threw an overhand right, and he caught Tunney. And then he landed 7 more punches, got him against the ropes. And to me, Joe, the amazing thing is that Tunney lived. No one gets 7 times by Dempsey and lives to tell the story. And he goes down. He's out. And Dempsey didn't go to a neutral corner. He refused in the heat of the moment. But the neutral corner rule had been in place by that point for 4 years because of Dempsey's fight with Louis Firpo when he knocked him out of the ring. And when he was knocked out of the ring, and it took him a long time to get in the ring, and he had the help of the sports writers. That was illegal.
Right. That's right, yes.
And then at that point, you couldn't stand over a fighter anymore because fans complained. This isn't a sport. You can't stand over a guy. It's not the way it's done. So they wanted to make it more palatable to the audience. So they said, you have to go to the farthest neutral corner. And he didn't do it. At that point, according to the rules of the Chicago Athletic Commission, when Dempsey won't go to the farthest neutral corner, the referee's supposed to look at the timekeeper and say, "Time," and grab Dempsey, "Neutral corner now." And then, today, look at the timekeeper, "Time in," and pick up the count from where the timekeeper was, which was, I think, 8 or 9 of them. He didn't do that.
So if you 8 and 9, you're out.
Right. Yeah. So it would have been 8, 9, time in. And Tunney was still on the canvas for another 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And Dempsey did this to himself, but Barry made the mistake of not picking up the count, which he was supposed to do. He was supposed to pick up the count from the timekeeper. Instead, he started at 1. And which gave Tunney enough time to get up. And after the fight, Dempsey didn't complain, but Tunney was in big trouble because he still owed that money to the mobster from Philadelphia. And Tunney retired shortly after he had won defense against a guy named Heenan from New Zealand, but he had to retire because the mobster, instead of hurting him, took him to court, and it was all over the papers. Tunney accepted money from Philadelphia killer, and so even though the mob was running boxing then, the Fangs didn't want to see him anymore, so he retired and married his heiress.
Right.
You know, there was no one like Jack Dempsey, the force of nature. Dempsey was the 1920s. That feeling of excitement you feel before a great fight starts, that's Jack Dempsey who did that.
Yeah. He got the blood going, didn't he? So, yeah. So the ring death of Betty Kid Perrette, which you talked about earlier, Blunders, blood feuds, mob corruption. What category does this fall in under?
That would be blood feuds, and partly it would be all three, I guess. Blunders and mob corruption. Perrette's manager, Manuel Farrell, had an in with the mob through someone he knew in Chicago or in New York. Excuse me. Yeah, and at that point, he's out. When you see that photo, I mean, Perrette is out. So these two guys were friends at the beginning. This was their third fight. First fight in Miami, Perrette wins the world welterweight title. And Perrette was a face-first fighter. So a guy like that, he had no defense. And his defense was his face, like Joe Joyce. And, guys like that have exciting careers, but short careers. The second fight, Griffith was ahead, but he fell asleep. He lost his concentration, as can happen in a fight. And a lot of people thought Griffith won, but they gave it to Perrette. Third fight should never have taken place because less than 4 months earlier, he challenged Gene Fullmer, who was built like a Sherman tank for the world middleweight title. And Fullmer destroyed him. He knocked him down 6 times in 10 rounds. It was a horrible beating. And when Angelo Dundee was in New York, he went to the training camp of Perrette, and he said to his trainer, he's a shot fighter, shouldn't be fighting. And, if you put him in the ring, he could really get hurt. And Al Farrell said, go back to Cuba and get another boy. And Angelo couldn't do it. And so he's getting ready to fight Perrette a second or a third time. And before the second fight, at the weigh-in, he called him a medicon, which is faggot in Spanish. And everyone knew Griffith was gay, but it was an open secret. And back then, because of the press, you couldn't publish it. No one would print it. Pete Hamill of the Times told me one time, he said, I said he was a homosexual, and he said, my editor changed it to unman, and I had to be restrained from beating him up. He said, what's an unman? A bread box is an unman. A football is an unman. So, they wouldn't print it, the same as they wouldn't print stuff about when they would show Kennedy photos of himself on a beach with some naked woman. He said, fine, take it to the press. I'm not going to print it. And knowing they wouldn't print it. So before this fight at the weigh-in, which should never have been held in the same venue, he again called him a medicon, but even worse, Griffith is stripped down to his underwear. And as he's on the scale, Perrette, who's also in his underwear, sneaks behind him, and he simulates sodomizing him and says, tonight I'll have you and your husband. And people who were there, the sports reporters, literally, like you see in the movies, their cigars dropped out of their mouth. And steam was almost coming out of Griffith's head. This wasn't just over the line. This was way over the line. And Griffith turned around and grabbed his throat and said, tonight you die. Tonight in the ring, you're going to pay for that with your life. Now, he didn't mean it. He was just really angry. And Gil Clancy, his trainer, a wonderful person, grabbed him and said, no. You don't fight for free. You fight for money. And he dragged him away. And they said, would you at least post your picture? And he said, no, I'll hit him if I do that. And the people, why did he do that? Why did Perrette? And he didn't stop. He did it all the way up to the bell. And the reason Perrette did that was the ethos of growing up in Cuba was machismo at the time he was growing up. Anyone who was gay, or especially a fighter, was thought to be less than a man. And certainly just by statistical numbers, there have to have been gay fighters before Griffith in fighting. And there were. Al Brown was gay. But there were fighters in Cuba as well. They just didn't come out because it wasn't safe for them to do so. So this goes on. And instead of being a fight for the rubber match for the world welterweight title, it became a fight not to see who was the better man, but to see who was more of a man. And once again, the fight starts, and Griffith's doing all right, but he loses focus early. And in the 6th round, he gets knocked down. And if the round had lasted another 20 seconds, Griffith or Pratt could have stopped him probably. And when he gets to the corner, his manager, Gil Clancy, or trainer, grabs his cheeks and puts his face nose to nose and said, "This is it, Emil. You lose this, there's no other shot. He's not going to give you a 4th match. You lose this, you're done. There's no other title shots. Your career is over. You get out there and you punch and you keep punching till the referee stops." And he had renewed vigor. He goes out and he starts beating up on Pratt. And Pratt had the unfortunate conundrum that happens to a lot of boxers. He was a young man, but he was an old man in a young man's body. And he had nothing left. He was just fighting on fumes. So 7th round, 8th round, 9th round, he's just getting hit steadily. And there's an uneasiness in the crowd, Joe, that they're thinking, maybe they should start thinking about stopping this. And then 11th, 12th round, and there's nothing left. And Griffith, Pratt's just against the ropes taking a whooping. And 13th round, he hits him a hard right hand. He goes back, left hand, right hand, and Pratt's arms go down. And then he lies. He's out. And he's being held up by the ropes. But Ruby Goldstein, the referee, throws. And Griffith landed 26 more punches.
Oh, boy.
And then Pratt slides to the corner. And then he slides, as you show that photo, slides down. And he's unconscious. And they sent him to the hospital. And he dies not too long after. And I always thought, people blame referee Ruby Goldstein. But when I looked at it, I thought, well, probably the first 3 punches that hit him in the 13th round killed him because his hands dropped and his eyes closed. After that, it didn't really mean anything. It was too much to watch. And people were reviled by it because this was live television. This was death as entertainment, live on a TV screen. So a lot of networks dropped it after. But there were sanctimonious people. One of my favorite writers, like Jim Brown of the LA Times, and not Jim Brown, that was the football player, Jim Murray, said there's right and there's wrong and boxing's wrong and it should never be allowed to happen. And of course, he covered the sport for another 35 years. But this should have been stopped, but the fight shouldn't have even gone on that long. And when I met Gene Fulmer, I spoke to him about this fight at the Hall of Fame in the early 2000s. And he said he never should have fought again. It wasn't my fault. And I said, I know that. He said, but it's the New York State Athletic Commission's fault because before the fight, Pratt was bleeding from the ears and the nose. And he had headaches. And his wife said, why don't you stop it? And he said, I can't stop it. The money's too great. And the money was missing after the fight. Excuse me. So it was a tragedy all the way around. And his wife they asked her, Pratt's wife, what would happen if he would have survived? She said he would have fought again. And I couldn't believe that she said that. And she said, what else is he going to do? He was illiterate. Couldn't read or write in Spanish or English. All he could do was fight. And he had no money left, yet he was getting $50,000 to fight, which his manager and the mob were stealing. So it was just it was mob corruption. It was a blood feud because they hated each other at that point. And it was a blunder by the New York State Athletic Commission because the fight never should have been allowed. No one from the New York State Athletic Commission was at the fight against Griffith in California. And that's customary today. But they didn't do that back then. And so if anyone would have seen him, they would have said, no, he's not going to fight again. Less than 4 months after this. And he did.
Let's talk about the Ali Listens, the Ali Listen fights 1 and 2. Listen, of course, renowned mob-related guy. Ali protected in a different way. Like, tell us about the connections. Why Ali seemed to be unaffected by mob influence.
Well, the mob certainly tried to get Ali, that's for sure. And Ali was protected in several ways. First of all, and there's one thing I found out recently, too, and I haven't told anyone this, but you'll be the first that I tell this to.
All right. Scoop.
Chris Dundee was the one who spilled the beans on Frankie Carmo and Blinky Palermo. He was the one that went to the FBI and showed them exactly what was going on and what they were doing and how they were ripping off fighters. And he worked for them, but he never, when the FBI investigated it in the Kefauver Committee, which still exists, looking into organized crime involvement in professional boxing, that committee is a standing committee. So it still exists. And they found that Chris Dundee, who worked for the mob, but didn't put on any suspect fights. And eventually, in time, he was the one who just said, this has got to stop. This has got to stop. Guys are getting hurt. Guys are getting their brains bashed and getting no money. And so, but he didn't tell Carbo and Palermo he was doing this, obviously. Right. They would have killed him. So he was very well connected within the mob. And so Ali comes along and they're protecting him. And Angelo was a great matchmaker and matched him well. But when they got to the first listing fight, the mob wanted to take over. And the guy they used was a guy named Jack Nyland from Philadelphia. Was part of the Philadelphia mob and was a good friend of Blinky Palermo's. Nyland hated Liston because Liston was incorrigible. Liston would do all sorts of terrible things to him, pick him up, put him in a garbage can, dump food on his head, rip his clothes off in public. And he just hated Liston, but he was told by his mom's superiors to be his manager. And before the fight, there's a film, a short clip, and in it, it's at the Miami Boxing, the Florida State Boxing Commission. And there's Chris Dundee, Angelo Dundee, and Jack Nyland. Jack Nyland saying for the first fight, I have to know who the referee is right now, because they wanted to get to the referee and bribe him.
Right.
And Chris said, no, not going to happen. Referee would be announced 15 minutes before fight time. I need to know now, or my guys aren't going to be happy. And Chris laughed and said, well, my guys are in New York and Chicago, and they run your guys. And, they don't care if your guys are happy or not. And what's he going to do at that point? He's been outmaneuvered. And Angelo said, what do you care who the referee is? Your guy's going to knock my guy out in 60 seconds anyways. Referee won't even come into play. And so no one gave Ali a chance. It wasn't considered within the realm of possibility. And he upsets Liston, just like he said he was going to do. And so we have the second fight. Second fight was going to happen in Boston, but Ali got a linguinal hernia. Apparently he was very seriously ill. He had to have an operation, and the fight postponed for 6 months. And Liston was in great shape then. The other factor was the WBA, which in my book I said stands for Without Brains Attached, pulled the recognition of Ali as champion, because how dare a colored man change his name and religion? Well, what did that have to do with boxing? In the United States, people change their name and religion every day, thousands of people. That had nothing to do with them. And there was a meeting of the WBA, of the Board of Governors. These weren't austere people. These were people that owned gas stations, greasy spoons. And they said, we got to throw these colored guys, and colored wasn't the word they used, back into the gutter where they came from. These aren't even human. And you read this and you think, I can't believe they're doing this. This is 1965. And before this fight, Liston's in great shape. But after the hernia, Liston has to wait 6 months, and he believes he's not going to ever get a chance to legitimately challenge Ali again for the title. So, Ali changed his name. It's a big thing. Ali's training. And before the second fight, Jimmy Ellis hits Ali with a body shot, breaks a rib. This is 2 days before the fight. They can't postpone it again, so he gets a cortisone shot. Liston never knew that. It was a closed training section. So they get to the fight, and Liston, about 3 days before the fight, Jerry Eisenberg said to me that he's there at the training camp and everyone's watching, listening. He can't get a rhythm going on the speed bag. He can't. He skips rope and he falls. And he said he looked at Robert Lipsyte because Jerry Eisenberg was with the Newark Star Eagle. He looked at him and he said, this guy's going to fight for the title? He can't even skip rope. He can't even get the speed bag going. Look at him. He's out of it. And Liston didn't believe he'd be given a fair shot. And so what most people don't know about this fight, they say it was a fixed fight, and that's simply not true. Because fixed fights, fighters don't get up. Liston got up. When the fight starts, in the first 10 seconds, Ali comes out and did what he did a minute later. He slips a jab, hits it, and comes right over with a counter right hand. Hits Liston right on the chin, and Liston's knees buckle. 10 seconds into the fight, Ali knew that when Liston jabbed, he would lean his head over his front foot, putting him off balance. And so Liston, instead of cutting off the ring, he follows Ali around the ring, which was the wrong strategy against a guy like Ali. And finally, after circling several times, he throws another jab. Ali slips it, throws a hard right hand. You see Liston's shoulders, tremble, and he goes down. The knockdown was legitimate. They'd been practicing that. Angelo called it slip, slide, and bang. And that's what happened. And that's the same way Leotis Martin knocked him out several years later. So Liston goes down. And Ali, the fight, Jersey Joe Walcott lost all control. Ali's running around the ring like he's about to take flight. He's a crazy man. And then and then the most famous picture in sports history with his arm over.
Right.
Get up, you bum. I want to show the whole world what's going on. You're a bum. You can't fight. Get up and fight like a man. And he keeps running. And 7 things happen at one point at the same time to prevent the fight from having any consistency. Liston goes down, which is what people saw. He gets up on his knees, and then he falls back down again. And it could have been a delayed reaction from the punch, but it looks like a swan dive. Liston said after, Ali was running around, and he came close to me, which he did. And I was afraid he'd hit me when I was down, or he'd hit me with his knee or kick me. So I stayed down. And when he got back up, Liston said I was fighting back when he stopped the fight. If I was going to fix the fight, I wouldn't have gotten up. So Liston hits the canvas. Ali's running around. Jersey Joe should have grabbed Ali and looked at the timekeeper.
To the neutral corner.
Yeah, go to the neutral corner. And if Ali didn't, go to neutral corner, it's your second warning or you get disqualified. And he goes to neutral corner. Then you look at the timekeeper, time in. That didn't happen. As Ali kept running around and around, they blamed the timekeeper, McDonough. They said, well, he didn't do his job. But if you watch the tape, he did do his job. He said you could hear his voice, and you can hear him hitting the canvas, 1, and giving a vigil sign, 2, 3. Right. You can hear him. The problem was everyone screaming, and Jersey Joe Walcott never looked at him. He knew he had to look at him, but he never did that. So after the count reached 10, Nat Fleischer called Liston over. But he wasn't there in an official capacity. He was just there covering it for ring. He shouldn't have been allowed to speak. So he goes over there. The timekeeper said, the fight's over. His knee was on the ground when I counted 10. The fight is over. And strictly by the rules, that's true. But he had gotten up and continued fighting, at which point Ali was really giving it to him. And Jersey Joe went in and stopped it. And the problem with this was people started yelling, fix. And then the rumors came out. The mob fixed it. The mob fixed the fight. The mob paid Liston to lie down. Liston bet millions of dollars on Ali to win. But there's no substantial proof. No one's come forth with concrete evidence to say that actually happened. The only evidence they had was Liston's manager, Ash Resnick. And he had called a friend, Bernard McGids, a local gambler from Houston, to come and watch the fight. And he told him to stay home. And he said, don't bet on it. And McGids said, Resnick told me that Liston was going to take a dive. But Resnick was on the radar of the FBI. His calls were all taped. There's no record of him saying that to Ash Resnick at all. And there's no record of him or Liston or McGids betting on Ali, because who are they going to bet with? They have to bet that kind of bet with a mob bookie. And who would take Liston's bets? He welched when he lost. He was playing with mob money. And no one's going to keep their mouth quiet. He would have had to lay off those bets with dozens of bookies. And that never happened. In fact, when Liston died in 1970, he hadn't been paid yet for either Ali fight. So that was completely untrue. The mob had nothing to do with it. And why would they give up the most valuable prize in sports to someone they had no control over? They had control over Ali for the first fight, and this was it. This was the last option on the second fight. Now they had Ernie Terrell waiting in the rings, but he was a dud at the box office. Ali, because of the Nation of Islam, specifically because of their security wing, was completely protected from the mob. And Liston was scared before the fight because Malcolm X had just been assassinated. And he thought they were going to come up to Louis Domain and kill him because Ali was quicker, and he wasn't. And they'd miss him and hit Liston. But why would Liston be afraid of the fruit of Islam, some fringe religious sect, when he had the mafia, the Chicago mafia behind him? You know, hundreds of killers that would protect him. So it didn't, all that talk about it being a fixed fight wasn't a fixed fight. And you could see Liston did get up and started to fight back. Who does that when they take a dive? No one gets up when they take a dive. You know, and no money changed hands. Liston got caught with a good shot, and that was it. And people can't accept that. And writers who thought Liston would kill him in the first fight, you know, they had to cover their own ass, and they did that by saying the second fight was fixed. There's no evidence that's ever been presented that it was fixed. The referee wasn't in on a fix. Jersey Joe was incompetent, but he didn't fix it. The timekeeper did his job, and Liston's knee was on the ground when the count of 10 was reached by the timekeeper. That's a knockout.
You know, this is fascinating stuff, really is, and you cover it so well in the book. And there's lots more. We could be here for like hours talking about this stuff. But you know what? We want people to go out and buy the book because it's fascinating stuff. So once again, here it is. Boxing's Greatest Controversies, Blunders, Blood Feuds, and Mob Corruption by Lewis, Joshua Eisen. Lou, it's just been fantastic having you here. Before we let you go, we're partnered with a group here called Believe, Become, Be You. It's a mentorship program for kids 10 to 17, inspired by the late Sean Gindy and led by Papa Jack. What's the message you would have for any kids out there who might be struggling to find their way in this crazy world we live in?
I'm glad you asked that. It gets better as you get older. It really does. When I was 6, my mother died. My father had a complete nervous breakdown. He was in the Clark Institute. I went from living with one relative to another relative to another relative. Every day for a new school, I got beaten up. And I thought, this is not a life. I don't want to live this. But eventually my father got better and I moved back in with him along with my sister. Life gets better. You got to give yourself a chance. And there will be a day soon in your life where you will live up to your capabilities and your promise, and you can be whatever you want to be. I say this when I go to grocery stores and I see an 18-year-old behind the counter. He's not too happy. And I always say to the guy, you have to remember, I was you once. This isn't your life job. This is just what you're doing now to make some money with a year off from university or from high school. That's all this is. You're only 18. You're just a puppy. You're not old guy like me, 64. So I went through what you went through. Anyone and everyone has the chance to succeed at whatever they want to do. And why not try to do that? Life will get better. You will find someone, and all it's going to take is one person to say, I love you, you count, and I'm going to make sure you know it.
Yeah, you know what? That game-changing moment, that game-changing event could be just around that next corner. You can just hang in there for a little bit longer, right?
All you have to do. It always is. George Foreman, he said his life was nothing until he went into the Job Corps, and then he learned to read. And it was like going from a dark room into a light room. He said, my whole life changed. I thought I'm just going to be a stupid, ignorant thief. And then when I learned to read, I thought, wait a minute, there's so much more in life I can do now. It's just around the corner. It really is. It could always be. You can't quit. My father would say, you can't quit because the next day could have been the day you made it.
Yeah, my two favorite fights of all time, Ali beating Foreman, in the Rumble in the Jungle, and then Foreman coming back and knocking out Michael Moore at 45 years of age.
I was
reading George's book by George. I got shivers right now thinking about it.
Oh,
me
we
too. Lost a
too.
real great recently. So
I mean, you knew him, and I loved him, and he was such a nice guy, and he was such a kind person. It's almost like he died and came back as Ali. And when I watched the fight with Michael Moore in my apartment, and I had about 10 other comics with me at the time, and when he won, we were all crying. We were all like, "Thank you for what we win."
It was beautiful.
Great thing happens. The greatest man on the planet now has come back and he's done it. Just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And, if he was still here, he'd come and talk to all the kids that you're helping. He would let them know. He'd hold their hand. He'd say, "You can do it. And I'm going to make sure you do it. And I'm going to check up on you to make sure you do it."
Awesome.
That was George.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Lou. This has been a pleasure. All right, when we come back, Donnie Lalonde, the original Golden Boy, remembers that massive fight with Sugar Ray Leonard. In 1992, the best locally owned restoration companies came together with one goal: to make disaster recovery better for Canadians. And to this day, DKI remains one of the only 100% Canadian-owned disaster restoration groups in the market. Fire, flood, or storm damage. When things go wrong, the right help makes all the difference. With the right tools and local expertise, we handle everything from emergency response to full-scale restoration, getting homes and businesses back on track the right way. Because a home is more than four walls. A business is more than a building, and recovery is about more than repairs. When you choose DKI, you're choosing a company that's put Canada first since 1992. Locally owned, nationally backed, Canadian through and through. Addiction Rehab Toronto, Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center, saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca. The super fight. Let's talk about that one. Sugar Ray Leonard, November 7th, 1988, Caesar's Palace. I was there. One of the biggest money fights ever, certainly for non-heavyweights. And tell us about this moment.
As you can imagine, it was surreal. First of all, Sugar Ray Leonard at light heavyweight just didn't make sense. Well, we did at super middleweight, but I'm a light heavyweight, so I never thought of fighting a Sugar Ray Leonard. I thought of fighting Hagler. I thought of fighting Spinks, Michael Spinks. I mean, I walked 5 miles home crying, swearing that I was going to win back the heavyweight title from Muhammad Ali against Leon Spinks. And then here I am with Sugar Ray Leonard, who in 1976, so like 12 years earlier, won a gold medal for the Olympics, in the Olympics for America at welterweight. Like I just never, So for me, really, I mean, I fundamentally or mathematically, I didn't see a way he could win the fight. Because as you mentioned, I'm a puncher. That was my strongest attribute. And I just thought, what, am I never going to hit this guy? I mean, obviously I'm going to hit this guy. As soon as I hit him, it's going to be over. Because I just thought it's impossible for him to finesse his way the whole time and not allow me to connect once. So I really went into the fight, you could say, overconfident. I was certainly over-prepared. I wasn't under-prepared. Tommy Gallagher did a great job in my training camp. I had very good sparring partners. So I prepared well for it. I probably overdid it because I went into the fight lighter than I needed to, even though the weight category was 168 and my normal is 175. I went into it 163, so I overdid it. I went in underweight, under prepared for a resilience type fight. Because I honestly didn't think it was a resilience fight. I thought I'm going to box him, and then eventually he's going to walk into a punch. The problem became when he did walk into that punch in the fourth round, in my mind, I'd switched. And as I was walking to the corner, just like in the Willie Edwards fight years before, which you were probably at, Joe, I remember thinking as I went to the neutral corner, this fight's over as soon as I hit him cleanly. Because I felt I hit Ray a little bit high on the cheekbone, and had I hit him a little lower, the fight would have been over. So I just felt, okay, that'll happen. And when I stopped fighting my fight, which is the fight that led to me landing that right now, and started waiting for myself to land the next punch, that's when Ray, pulled out his arsenal of experience, internal intestinal fortitude, incredible mean, just focus at ending a fight, like he did with Tommy Hearns and so many other great finishes he did. Ray was a great finisher.
He was a finisher. Yeah.
As soon as he saw me take my foot off the pedal, he switched gears immediately. And as you could see, he started outboxing me, and he started hitting me with some good shots. And people say he was only a welterweight. He was only a welterweight, but at the time, I mean, by this point of the fight, 5 rounds into it, I was probably like at best a middleweight. Like 156 to 154 to 160 was
right.
And I was in the best at that weight class. I mean, I was really light, and at this point in the fight, and my strength, the power started to become less, and Ray's impact of his punches became more as I became weaker. So Ray just, he fought a brilliant fight. He picked up through his, 8th sense exactly when was the right time. He turned it on, and then fortunately, around the middle of the 8th round, I realized, okay, I've got to turn this back around. I've got to start fighting again. The way I fought to get here, the old fight plan, and I started doing that again. And as you saw in the fight, I mean, from the about 3/4 of the way through the 8th round to almost till the fight ended, I had Ray. I was hitting him from pillar to post. I mean, technically, I was beating Ray Leonard. I was the better fighter that night. But
and the scorecard showed that. The scorecard showed that you were, that was a very close fight, but some had you hit.
Yeah, and I certainly
until he turned it around.
Yeah, and then I caught him. The downfall was when I caught him with a left hook right in the middle of the ring. But everybody said I didn't have a left hook. I caught him with a beautiful left hook right in the middle of the ring, hurt him, and was all over him. And I literally was thinking to myself, and I actually said, but I have a mouthpiece on, what do you want me to do, kill this old man? I thought, hitting him like from pillar to post, why aren't they stopping this fight? What do they want me to do to this guy? Because in those days, 32 years old was old. And I'm thinking at 28, I mean, he's an old man. I don't want to hurt this guy. It's a boxing match. And foolishly, and I just kind of took, again, my foot off the pedal and stopped sort of like being aggressive. And Ray felt that and right away turned around, hit me with a left hook. I went down, I got up, I was hurt. I looked at him, I just kind of like shrugged and smiled. And I went, oh my God, he's got me. I have nothing left. And so he just, whether it was mental or physical, Ray beat me that day. And he beat me because he was a more experienced, better fighter.
Discover the secret to timeless vitality at Renew Medical Center in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Our specialists unravel the science of aging, tailoring plans to defy its effects. Experience cutting-edge regenerative therapies such as stem cells and exosomes, addressing aging at its core.
It's a wonderful spot, and I highly recommend it for whatever you may need, whether you just want to feel better, you want to look better, have basically a quality of life, just to ramp it up a little bit as we age.
Liberate yourself from aging-related concerns. where accountability, technology, and passion for regenerative medicine converge. Begin your path to peak health and wellness with us. Schedule your appointment today at renewpv.com and elevate your quality of life.
Parents, what's the biggest fear for kids 10 to 14? A future they think they can't handle. At Believe, Become, Be You, we know confidence in the future is a habit we can build. Our course doesn't just prepare kids for the future, it seeds them with skills they will use now. For a limited time, the I Believe in Me Foundation is offering the first 1,000 kids and their parents 1 year free access. This priceless opportunity will save you over $2,000. This isn't just a course. It's a journey in developing life-enhancing skills that will grow with your child, fostering gritty minds, creative futures, and better bonds. Get signed up now at believebecomebu.com. That's believebecomebu.com.
And we want to thank all the folks who make this show possible. These are friends, trusted business associates, and all-around great people. We highly recommend them all. Thank you for your support of Canadian sports. A reminder that the show is available on iTunes, Breaker, or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. Also, check out the show on YouTube. All of our past great shows, clips, and shorts are on there. Like and subscribe. It's absolutely free. Our socials are at Joe Swiss Tilley on Instagram and Threads. Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show on Facebook. Thanks once again to Lou Eisen for joining us. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. MNP, a leading Canadian national accounting, tax, and business accounting firm. MNP proudly serves and responds to the need of their clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, MNP provides a collaborative, cost-effective approach to do business and personal strategies to help people and organizations to succeed across the country and around the world. With local offices in Oshawa, Mississauga, Burlington, and more, their team is here to support you. Visit mnp.ca today to learn more. Brian Gribben Insurance Planning, helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in their early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today. Let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678. Hi, I'm Joe Tilley, and I want to tell you about the painting pros. Patrick and his crew recently came into my home and they painted the walls. They added some color. It's fantastic. And I can't be more satisfied with the work they did. That crew is tremendous. They were professional. They were courteous. They were respectful. And they did a fantastic job. Look at that. Look at that color. I just can't stress enough how satisfied we truly are with Patrick and his crew. For all your painting needs, go with the pros. Joe Tilley here. My wife Penny Claire and I recently took an amazing trip to Egypt and Jordan with Trip Oppo. And here are our top 10 must-dos. Another must-do experience is a luxurious cruise down the Nile River. The ship was elegantly furnished with premium facilities, including a spacious lounge and a swimming pool. The cabins were comfortable, well-appointed, offering panoramic views of the Nile River and the surrounding landscape. I would highly recommend that you book your next trip through Trip Oppo. Call them today. Rooted in 60 years of tradition, Sleepy Hollow is a private golf club with a friendly community of members just minutes from Toronto. With mature trees and rolling fairways, Sleepy Hollow provides a challenging and enjoyable experience for passionate golfers. Enjoy great golf, amazing dining, and a picturesque patio second to none. Visit sleepyhollowcountryclub.com.